could be possible that Nikola Tesla touched on something that humanity had never ever done before with radio signals. He experimented and was one of the first to tap into that frequency. So what if he tapped into something that was keeping their eye on us, and they just sent that message back to say, we know that you're watching us? Was it a signal from another civilization, just letting him know that he was being observed as well?
It is a well-known fact that Nikola Tesla detected the signals in 1899. It's also a well-known fact that we didn't have radio astronomy, we didn't have radio telescopes. We could look at planets like Mars and Moon and those in our solar system with a simple telescope. But we didn't have the technology to communicate with the stars. The big question is, the signal that Tesla detected, was it from an orbiting satellite? And in 1928 in Norway, Jørgen Hals and his colleague received a signal again. It was stored and saved and translated by Duncan Lunan in 1973 and said to be originated from the constellation of Epsilon Boötis. The facts are clear. We didn't have any satellites in orbit in 1899 or in 1928. So where did the signals come from? Donald Keyhoe, researcher, could tell that United States Air Force had reported not just one, but 2 satellites in a retrograde orbit around our planet. Who put them up there? Because we didn't have anything up there at that time. The first known polar orbiting satellite we know of was in 1960s when America launched TIROS. The interesting thing and the big breakthrough with polar orbiting satellites is that when they orbiting the Earth from north to south and south to north, it gets over a new piece of land as the Earth spins on its axis and you can cover the whole planet. That was a technology that didn't exist until 1960 when they launched TIROS. Knowing these facts, I ask the question, where did these signals come from and what was it that was orbiting the Earth? After Donald Keyhoe went public in 1954 with the disclosure on American Air Force and the satellites in orbit, it was picked up by Time magazine. Time magazine brought his statement out to the public. Later on, Time magazine brought a new article describing how we now for the first time have sent up a satellite in polar orbit. That was TIROS.
There is a highly strong possibility that we would be able to see the Black Knight satellite with our naked eye, because it's depicted to be anchored within Earth's polar orbit. So I'm imagining that we could very well see it with our naked eye in the daytime, and on a clear night possibly be able to see it pass.
And then in December 1998, NASA went on its STS Mission 88, the famous mission who went to connect the Unity node module to the ISS space station, and the ISS space station would become a habitable space station. But while they were up there was something else. This is recorded with a handheld camera on board the space shuttle. And what you see is that actual thermal blanket that they lost, and they filmed it on video. The reason we're bringing this up is because there are 6 famous pictures that all show something, and NASA says it's a thermal blanket. I say we're looking at a thermal blanket in the video, but not on the pictures. Let's have a look at the 6 pictures from NASA. That video shows us nothing that can be compared to what we see on the pictures. I believe that NASA have recorded this video after they took the pictures, so they could debunk the pictures, because they couldn't get rid of the pictures, but they could create a video. And if that video is recorded before or after the incident, we won't know, and we probably won't find out. But I believe that what we're looking at in the pictures are not what's in the video. We have seen videos, we have seen pictures now of what is believed to be the Black Knight satellite. But one of the most important people in all this is Duncan Lunan, the man who translated the signals in 1973. We decided to go visit Duncan and let him have half an hour of free speech.
Duncan Lunan, we know that in 1973 that your name has come up quite a lot, especially with the Black Knight satellite theory. Could you elaborate a little bit on that for me?
Certainly. In 1967, I set up a discussion project in what was then Scotland's National Spaceflight Society, which led to my book Man in the Stars that was published in 1974. At the first meeting, the guest speaker was Professor Archie Roy, who spoke on exoplanets by invitation, as we now call them. But he, for some reason, felt that was too controversial and he wouldn't allow his name to be used in the book. But the unnamed astronomer in the first chapter is Archie Roy. Another of the participants was the late John McVeigh, who was a chemical engineer, safety officer at the ICI explosives plant at Ardea, head of the British Astronomical Association Variable Star Section, a very keen radio ham, and had at that time, well, then and after, he wrote a number of books on interstellar travel, time travel, and other such topics, but particularly interstellar travel. So when I set up the project, which was to discuss the first wave of human colonization when we move out to the stars, what had prompted me to do that was that in the 60s there had been several books published about the first interstellar mission, but nobody had looked beyond it. What do we do after that? Where do we go next? What do we do? In the course of the discussion at that first meeting, John drew my attention to a suggestion by Professor Ron Bracewell of Stanford University that a probe from another civilization had tried to contact us by radio in the 1920s.
That's the Bracewell theory,
That's
isn't
the
it?
one,
Yeah.
yes. I did actually already, I already read about it, but the significance of it hadn't really struck me. But prompted by John McVeigh, when I got into the writing phase with the book, I went and looked it all up. And I had actually, now the phenomenon that they detected in the 1920s was long-delayed radio echoes. Phillips at Eindhoven were doing round-the-world experiments in bouncing radio signals around the world off the ionosphere. And there were volunteers taking part, listening all over the world. And a telephone engineer called Hals in Oslo picked up the first long-delayed echoes. The round-the-world echo takes 1/7 of a second at the speed of light. He was picking up echoes with a 3-second delay, which he correctly identified as the delay from the Earth to the Moon and back. He went with that to Professor Carl Sturmer at the university there, who was an expert in the Aurora Borealis. It didn't take Sturmer long to prove that the echoes were not bouncing off the Moon. The echoes were not bouncing off the Moon, which is a very poor reflector anyway. Timing was wrong. He had his own theory that the Earth would be surrounded at about that distance by a sphere of electrons, particles from the Sun deflected by the Earth's magnetic field. And he jumped to the idea that they were bouncing off that sphere. And this is where the echoes came into the picture. Actually, the return signals were far too loud to be echoes, but he didn't catch that. However, he contacted van der Pol at Eindhoven, who was doing the Phillips transmissions, and he increased the spacing between his signals from 5 seconds to 20. Immediately, Sturmer got a phone call from Hals to say, long delayed echoes are happening, come to my house immediately. He rushed over there, heard the last of, or almost the last, but one of the 3-second echoes. Because at that point, the delay times began to vary. And they grabbed pencil and paper and noted them down as best they could. Varying up to 15 seconds. They immediately telegraphed van der Pol, who increased the spacing again to 30 seconds and made a detailed record of what he heard in response. The phenomenon went on. They heard several more instances over the next few weeks, and then it seemed to stop. French expedition at an eclipse of the Sun in Indochina the following year heard 3 days of them and made a detailed record. And then again, it didn't exactly stop, but there were other instances, but they weren't as definitive, they weren't as distinctive. So I read up on it all, and I wrote up for my book a page about it, saying the variations appear to be random, and I guess there's nothing. It's a natural phenomenon, or an unknown natural phenomenon. That's what it appears to be. One thing that I had missed was there was no variation of the intensity with delay time, which meant there was a single source. Something was delaying them as well as amplifying them.
Okay.
So, around the point that I realised that could be significant, I went back and reread Bressel's papers. And at the end of one of them, he had said, should we be surprised if the first actual message received is a TV image of a constellation to tell us where the spacecraft has come from? Because his whole thesis was that interstellar communication by space probe was more efficient than radio, long distance radio anyway. So the idea occurred to me that the stars are spaced at random in the sky, so a set of star map coordinates would be a random series of numbers. And
like binary?
Yeah, well, no, just as they are.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we had given them the second,
Okay.
5 seconds, and our pulse is spread over 3 seconds, and then 15 seconds, and then 30.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, right, and I did nothing. It's quite instructive about how the mind works in these regards, that you find something interesting and there's almost something pushes you away from it. However, going out to the Astra meeting by train in Hamilton, where we met at the time, I met the young Gavin Roberts, who afterwards became co-illustrator of Man in the Stars and 2 more of my books. And I told him about it, and he said, have you tried it? And I said, no. And he said, why not? Do it at once. And I said, well, have you got any graph paper? And he hadn't. So we drew a little graph in the corner of the page and plotted it. Couldn't see anything significant. Gavin said, wouldn't it be nice if it made a face? And he afterwards made it into a face, which was quite dramatic, but probably of no significance. However, the thing was, I had put the delay time, the significant variant, on the y-axis, as one does. And at the end of the meeting, talking to the founder of Astra, the late Professor Friegelhofer from Transylvania, I said to him, of course I could try the axes the other way around. That's even less likely to produce an intelligent, which, when you think about it, is a daft thing to say, because who knows what their graphical conventions are. So I took the train back into Glasgow, and the train from Glasgow back down to Troon, here where I lived at the time and now do again. And it was leaving the first stop, which was Paisley, that I suddenly remembered. And I got out my notebook, and I drew an even smaller graph because there was only a tiny bit of the page left, and plotted in the dots, and I just looked at it and went, that looks more like an intelligence signal. In fact, it looks familiar, and I know what that is. And what it appeared to be was an image of the constellation Boötes, the herdsman, with the star Epsilon Boötes picked out. And I just went, there we go, we are not alone in the universe. Logic is universal, I always thought so. They can send us a message that we can understand. And I looked up, and all the trains had compartments in those days, and all the people in the compartment were looking at me.
Looking at you with big wide eyes. What have you said? And
I thought, shall I tell them? No, they pull the communication cord. So I waited till the train got to Troon, and I dashed upstairs, and I got out the star catalogue, and I looked up Epsilon Boötes, and I discovered that it was a double star, and the main sun was an orange giant. Everything, as it seemed, fell into place again. Because Frank Drake had made an issue of the question, what motivates people to attempt interstellar signaling of any kind? These guys have every motivation to do it, because by the time their sun is the age of our sun, it will have left the main sequence and become an orange giant. So then I thought, they have sent out the probes bearing this message. The statement is an appeal. Our home star is an orange giant. It is like dialing 999 and shouting, "My house is on fire." So they've got the concept of help. They're assuming they'll send out the probes as soon as they can do it, and they'll assume that any culture they contact will be more advanced. And they're appealing for help, so they've got the concept of help. On the other hand, it must have occurred to them that a message might be heard by a less advanced culture, but like ours, and any advantage that might give them is thrown away in the first message. They're not coming to take us over. They are still appealing for help. They are moral beings. Morality as well as logic is universal. I was flying around the ceiling.
I bet you were.
And it was a very intense 2 years that followed. I attempted translations of all the message records I could get hold of, and it ended up with, among other things, what appeared to be a plan of their solar system, with 6 planets, and they had seemingly evolved on the second one and moved to the 6th. This was all in the message. And the star maps and that bit were published by the British Interplanetary Society. It started as an overnight sensation. The referee on the paper was the late A.T. Lawton, Tony Lawton, who was initially very enthusiastic. He asked if he could mention it in a talk he was giving to the BIS in London. And I said yes. And he rang me afterwards and said there were only about a dozen people there. He said yeah, they were all very interested, except for one chap who obviously couldn't take it. He got up and left. Well, it turned out he was a reporter from the Sunday Telegraph heading for the phone.
Okay.
The story broke as a front page scoop in the Sunday Telegraph on Christmas Eve of 1972. It was on right before the BBC went off the news the previous night. Cliff Mitchamore, in his review of the year, ended it by saying, "And finally, there is a breathtaking story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph tomorrow, don't miss it." And that was the end of the programme.
Wow.
It was on the radio news for the first few hours on the early news bulletins. The 9 o'clock news bulletin ended with the words, "We are getting news of a terrible earthquake in Nicaragua. There will be more details in the next bulletin." And at 10 o'clock, all the news was about Nicaragua. My story was just wiped right out of the headlines.
Yeah.
So, after Christmas, people started thinking, wait a minute, wasn't there something?
Something about a planet.
And they went looking. Now, the thing was, the Telegraph had sent an old retired reporter over from Edinburgh to get my personal details. And because I was born in Edinburgh, nothing would do, but he had to put in Mr. Lunan as a native of Edinburgh. And he got very shirty with my mother, who had a degree in languages, saying, "You obviously don't realise, madam, that native comes from the Latin that means born, and Mr. Lunan was born in Edinburgh, he is a native of Edinburgh." No mention of my being a graduate at Glasgow or of living in Troon. Nothing about the West Coast at all, just Edinburgh. So when people started trying to follow up the story, they looked for me in Edinburgh and couldn't find me. So the Daily Mail ran a story that got all the facts wrong, and it was syndicated across the USA. And in the aftermath, only the National Enquirer took the trouble to get it right. And the National Enquirer story was absolutely authentic, so nobody believed it because it was in the National Enquirer.
Okay.
Time magazine printed the Daily Mail version.
Okay.
Said they would print out a correction, but didn't.
Okay.
So that's on my Wikipedia page. And they called me the Professor of Astronomy at Glasgow University.
Okay.
And ever since, Professor Lunan of Glasgow University has led a life of his own, quite separate from mine. And for years, people were sending Professor Sweet, who always thought I was a waste of space, diagrams of UFO interiors and the like, and he would pass them on to me with little notes saying, "Yours, I think."
Yes, I think your name is one of the most Googled names with this Black Knight theory and whatever people have to say about it. Your name always comes up with it.
So here we go. Right. In one of the many correspondences that I engaged with at the time, there was a correspondence with an American UFO, Samizdat magazine, self-printed. And these guys said to me, are you aware that in the late 60s, early 70s, the USAF detected 2 satellites in polar orbit, which were unidentified. And now the thing was, it turned out with long-delayed radio echoes. James Strong, who was one of the people who'd written on interstellar travel before me, had published a book in which he had suggested that the Bracewell probes might be located at one or other of the Lagrange points in the orbit of the Moon, which form equilateral triangles with the Earth and Moon. It's a fixed relationship. Also called the Trojan points, because there are asteroids like that in Jupiter's orbit. Well, it turns out Strong was right. The long-delayed echoes do indeed come from the Lagrange points, both of them. So if it's a Bracewell probe, it's actually 2, probably.
So there's 2, not 1, if there is.
So there were these 2 unexplained, supposedly, satellites in polar orbit. It did not take me very long a time to find out what they were. At that time, the United States Air Force was running the first spy satellite program, which was called Corona. The satellites were called Discoverer. They were also the first US attempts to recover payloads from orbit, specifically the films. Alistair MacLean's novelised Station Zebra is based on an actual incident where one of them came down off Spitsbergen, because the trouble was, in recovering payloads from orbit, it had not been done before, and a lot of them went astray. One fell in the Pacific and was recovered by the Bathurst Trieste, but it was crushed by the pressure. Film was no use. Now, 2 of them went in completely the wrong direction. The retro rockets fired 180 degrees from where they should have, and the payloads went into orbits, still in polar orbit because they were spy satellites, but going up to 2,000 miles, grazing the atmosphere at the other end. And they were very quickly identified. I had books in my collection from 1969 and 1971 that identified them as these 2 satellites, as the missing Discoverer payloads. No question of what they were. All of the orbital elements were correct, except the 2,000-mile apogee, which was because the retro rockets had fired backwards. So that was that. And as far as I was concerned, it was the end of the matter. But meanwhile, there was something else. In the early 1950s, Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of Pluto, had conducted a search for natural moons of the Earth in the plane of the equator at a estimated distance of around 10,000 miles. It wasn't a new idea. Jules Verne mentions it from the Earth to the Moon, and other people did too. But he looked and found nothing, and always insisted that he found nothing. But a newspaper in South America carried a report that he'd found 2, and Tombaugh spent the rest of his life denying it. I saw him do it on Patrick Moore's programme, and he kept on saying, I never found anything. And anyway, they don't exist. With the quality of amateur instruments now, anybody could find them. I know a chap who bought a Celestron, and one of the first things he did was photograph communication satellites in synchronous orbit. That's what they did.
What do you think about the 5 famous NASA images from that STS-88 mission?
They are bits. That was the mission on which they joined the first Russian segment, the first American segment of the International Space Station. And they had to go outside on EVA and join up a lot of cables and pipes and all kinds of things that join them together and make them work together. And in the photographs you can even see where some of the dust covers and bits of masking tape have been removed as they were doing it. They were meant to bag them all, but as my friend Jim Oberg, ex-NASA, says, they were a messy crew. They didn't get them all. And that's what those pictures are of. And the proof of it is that they are blurry. They're out of focus. When these guys are trained to death in astronomy, and photography I should say, when they first sent the shuttle to the Russian space station, no American had ever seen it. But the pictures on approach are perfectly clear. You can count the rivets. If those objects had been big spacecraft, the pictures would have been perfectly clear. The reason they're not is that they're small objects near the windows and they can't tell just how far away they are. They can't get a focus on them. And that's all there is to that. Anyway, the shuttle and the space station are not anywhere near equatorial orbit, where Tomba's supposed satellites were.
Oh, okay.
Or
so they're not
polar
anywhere
orbit,
near
or polar orbit, where the spy
signals.
satellites, or the plane of the moon's orbit, where the Bracewell probes
Okay.
would be.
So that clears a little bit of.
Yeah. But by 1976, I had proved my deductions about the epsilon dosage system to be wrong. They are completely wrong. The distance of the star was wrong, so all the calculations are wrong as a result. The second planet and sixth planet would never have been habitable if they existed, and anyway the star was far too short-lived to have had habitable planets. It's a lot more massive than I had taken it to be. So, nevertheless, it's that bit central to my withdrawal, which I did, published in 1976, is the bit that keeps getting attached to my name in connection with Black Knight.
So we can now put it to bed, and we've heard from the man himself that how this all came about and what was what behind his theories and discoveries, and it's more scientific and astronomical.
Yeah. The only curious thing is that afterwards it turned out that Epsilon Proteus is significant in ancient astronomy. That's
it odd. Connects to these sites, which is odd.
Maybe that translation I made of that first signal is correct. But again, we're dealing with coincidence. The ones heard earlier that day were just hastily scribbled. Van der Poel's was the first accurate record, but it wasn't the first signal.
So what we can say is that some of it was right, but some of it wasn't. A lot of the guys out there got mistakes, but we've now got the truth, and that there is something out there, but we don't know what it is yet.
The story's not over.
It's not over, though.
Because...
do you think we're alone, Duncan?
Oh, certainly not. Children from the Sky, which you're covering in a different presentation, unless you add it to this. Definitely, I think we are not alone. I think we have been visited. I don't think there's anyone here now, but...
could we still be watched like a Bracewell probe?
Well, searches were eventually made of the Lagrange points and nothing was found. So, if it was there, it's gone. Where has it gone?
Or waiting to come back.
Yes, maybe it's around somewhere, but it's a bit hard to figure out why it would have moved after I figured out where it was. That doesn't really make sense to me. But, yeah, the story is definitely not over. I think they've been here. I think the evidence is here to find. Even if we are a protected species, and I think that's highly probable, once we're capable of asking the question, I see no point in denying us the answer. So I think the proof is here. It's not out there. Somewhere on Earth, there's a ship.
Perhaps we are the proof.
I don't think so. No, I don't buy that. But the Earth is very difficult to get off. I think the ship's still here.
Okay.
The question is, where did they put it?
Where did they hide it?
Yes.
Perhaps we'll cover the Sphinx in Egypt another day.
Yes, by all means.
Yes. Duncan Lunan, thank you so much for putting a lot to rest.
These satellite dishes. Echelon is not present here with an office or so, but Echelon has digital access to every single satellite dish in the United Kingdom, including dishes as this one. So if they want to find information or track information from satellites or telephone satellites in our airspace here, that would be the satellite that Echelon would log into to retrieve their telephone calls, or whoever they are listening into, radio communications or other digital adventures. This is exciting to be here, because we all know that nothing is secret. You can't hide anything digital anymore, not with organizations like Echelon, not with projects like the Vortex projects and all the other projects that has been up before that. You might think this is Spaceport Cornwall, but it's also Echelon listening station, and I'm not even sure that the employees or those who are in charge in here are aware of Echelon's capabilities of taking over their satellite and using it for intelligence service, as they call it. So when you take your phone up and make a phone call to your friend, your mom, your dad, or whoever you're talking to, this phone call goes straight on to a satellite and back again, and that satellite is directly connected to hundreds of dishes like this, and this is where Echelon can go in and listen to your phone conversation, because you don't even know what satellite your conversation is going through today. Nothing digital is secured in this world anymore. You can't hide anything anymore. Everything is stored with help of satellite communication like these dishes here in Cornwall.